My name is Chris Desi. I am billed now as the quantum coach. And the reason why I talk about quantum coaching is because where my head and my heart are have to do with the alignment of science and spirit of alignment, essentially. So being able to not just excel within the business world and have material success, but also to be aligned from an internal perspective. I've been an executive in media for the past 27 years. I've run my own digital marketing agencies. I've been a sort of talking head on television for a bunch of years. And this past summer, I had what I could only refer to as a quantum shift. And I really want to be transparent with everybody on the call right now, because the transparency is the only way that we could all collaborate with each other and have this bigger discussion about spirit and individual and true success. And that is, I was in the middle of watching a deposition from a lawsuit that I was involved in while on vacation in Key Island, South Carolina. And I had excused myself from my family vacation for about 3.5 hours to watch a deposition of a former executive absolutely eviscerate my good name. And I was hunched over and I was upset about it and could not believe that this was happening. And I went for a walk on the beach, pretty cliche, right? And while I was on that walk, I said, there's got to be more. There's got to be more to this life. There's got to be more for what's out there for me. And not to be overly dramatic, but I kind of faced the ocean and said, hey, please let me be your vessel, God, source energy, power. And I had major shift in my entire perspective on my life, on my business, on my relationships with my family, my friends, my mother. And it definitively changed everything who I am. And it reminded me of, there's a Bhagavad Gita says, we're born into the world of nature and our second birth is into the world of spirit. And this aligns exactly with what I went through, and perhaps that resonates for some of you. I just turned 50 in February, had this experience over the summer, and I've committed to myself that I don't want to live the next 50 years of my life the same way that I lived the first. Not that I was living terribly, just that I was putting myself in situations where the people that I was engaging with were, like what I had experienced. And so I started seeking and began reading a lot. And for years, I was interested in manifestation and meditation, but I think I got it wrong. And I think I used that manifestation more seeking monetary success as opposed to feeling the success in my heart and in my soul. And I came across a reading through Wayne Dyer in his book, The Shift, and it's from Rumi. And it says, the spiritual path wrecks the body and afterwards restores it to health. It destroys the house to unearth the treasure, and with that treasure builds it better than before. And I think many people, after I had sort of announced that I was going through this shift, quietly acknowledged to me that they were going through a similar shift in their lives. And I find that encouraging personally. I think people are awakening. And I think that while people may look at their lives and say things are terrible and look at the world and that's awful, I choose to be incredibly optimistic about things. And I choose to do things like this so that we can all collectively awaken from the illusion of our reality and really understand that life is just this persistent dream that we are having, and to kind of go a little bit deeper and figure out whether we are living the dream or having the dream. And it reminds me of sort of philosophy 101 with Dr. Stapleton. I went to Loyola University in Maryland, and on Dr. Stapleton, my sophomore year in college, we learned about Plato's Allegory of the Cave. And if you haven't heard about the Allegory of the Cave, it is a parable that Plato shares about prisoners who mistake shadows on a wall from a fire that's behind them for reality. So the prisoners are in shackles, they're staring at a wall, there's a fire behind them, and then there's sort of people that are holding cutouts of certain images and shapes that the fire is illuminating against the wall. And when one prisoner is freed from this cave, they discover the outside world and they interact with true objects, representing a journey from ignorance to enlightenment. And it's difficult for that prisoner to experience because the enlightenment and going outside, literally and figuratively, enlightenment burns his eyes. He's not been outside before. And upon returning to the cave, the enlightened prisoner is met with hostility from the other prisoners that are within that cave, because their reality is the shadow realm and their reality is what is projected on the wall. And they prefer that familiarity, that limited myopic view, illustrating how difficult it can be for some of us that are perhaps on a journey toward enlightenment. Everything that I've done thus far when it comes to being the quantum coach and working with my clients one-on-one is that I'm a student too, and I'm going through this with you, and that the goal is eventually to become enlightened, but you will be met with pretty consistent resistance. And sometimes the ideas that you can come across may be challenged and maybe also might stretch your own mind and spirit as to what is reality. And it reminds me of a gentleman, Dr. Thomas Campbell. If you've not heard of him, he wrote a book called My Big Toe, TOE, Theory of Everything. I am very lucky to have had just confirmed that in January, he'll be appearing on my podcast, the Quantum Shift podcast. And I've read 2 of his books, and Dr. Campbell talks about essentially this world, this reality in that allegory of the cave being a simulation, that's his thesis as a physicist, that his life's work has proved to him. And I find that very fascinating because the convergence of science and spirit is really where I wanted the quantum shift, the coaching, as well as the podcast to converge. And Dr. Campbell talks about how in our society, in our reality, we are taught to cultivate our intellectual side, our brain, our minds, mathematical, quantitative, figuring out models, going to school, learning, taking exams, etc. And that the scale is not balanced anymore. That if you look at it as sort of like an XY axis, our intellectual pursuits are very high. We read a lot. We expose our children and ourselves to education and universities. However, in our modern world, the other side of our intellect, our spirit, our consciousness has been neglected, our intuition. So that scale of intellect and intuition, unfortunately, is out of balance. And Dr. Campbell's goal, and frankly, my mission, what I believe is my dharma, is to allow for both of those to be equally as imparted into our daily lives, for us to work on our intellect, but also work on our intuition. And I'll speak of him in a moment, but I did speak with another doctor yesterday. I just posted on the Quantum Shift podcast, where instead of saying that we have one brain, he says we have 3 brains, and that it is the mind, the heart, and then the microbiome in our gut. And how the microbiome actually communicates with our heart, and the neuro pathways from our heart to our brain. There are more pathways from our heart to our brain than our brain to our heart, which I found fascinating. I don't pretend to be an expert in science and understand all of those things, and I will continue to take a deeper dive in order to educate myself. But it struck me because it got me thinking about what is it that angers us? And what are the little nuanced annoyances that we all experience in our lives? And is that reality? Pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. And it reminded me of the allegory of a monk. And it's a Buddhist story that really challenges you to say, do you really know what angers you? And there's a monk, he's at a monastery, and his job every day is to meditate. But that monk in the monastery, while meditating, hears noises of other monks coming and going, and that irritates him. Don't they see that he's trying to meditate? Don't they see that he's experiencing this moment and this joy of the meditation? And he gets very frustrated, and he decides that he's going to leave the monastery for his meditation after he goes for a walk and he encounters a lake. And he says, I'm just going to set up on the side of the lake, and I'm going to meditate next to this lake, until he hears a cacophony of birds coming in and leaving, and animals and everything that's happening around the lake, all of the life that is happening around the lake. And that disturbs him, and that annoys him, and that angers him. So then the next day he says, okay, I figured it out. And he finds a boat that's on the side of the lake. And so he paddles to the center of the lake and he meditates, and he's finally at peace. And he has a beautiful day of peaceful meditation, and nothing is interrupting him and nothing is angering him. Until one day, when he goes out to the center of the lake, he sees another boat coming toward him. And he's so annoyed. He's in his place of peace, and he's screaming at whoever is on that boat, please stop, please stop. And then boom, the boat hits into his boat. And he realizes that the boat was empty. It had just gotten pushed off on the side of the lake. and into the water. And it challenges us and this monk to really dig in and figure out what it is that annoys us on a day-to-day basis. And what are those things that take us out of our present moment, and to really challenge ourselves and to say, are they real? Again, I said it earlier, pain is inevitable, suffering optional. For me, that's where my work is. I know that that's something that I need to take care of. My meditations extract me from that, and I try to pull myself away from that reactionary perspective in order to pull back and realize that it's not the things around us that are angering us. It is our perception of the things around us that anger us. And there's another parable that I just read about where there's three people walking past a parrot, and the first person walks past the parrot, and the parrot goes, rah, rah, rah. And he goes, what an awful sound of that parrot. Second person walks past it, and the parrot goes, wah. And goes, wow, what a beautiful parrot. That was such a beautiful, beautiful noise. And the third person walks by, and the parrot goes, wah. And he goes, well, hello, Mr. Parrot. My name is Bob, and has a conversation with it. And nothing resoundingly profound there, but the idea being that those three people had three very different experiences with that parrot and with that world. And conceptually, it is that in our universe, we are happening to our world. It is not the world that is happening to us, that our perception and the way we see things and the way we experience things around us, that is our reality, that the universe and consciousness need each other. And the universe wouldn't be here without consciousness for us to observe it, but we are being observed as well. So sometimes it's a little difficult for us to all kind of wrap our heads around, but it is a perspective that I think helps give that space. Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching says, in the pursuit of knowledge, everything is added. In the practice of the way, every day something is dropped. So that wisdom of, instead of adding things, but extracting and peeling away things, conceptually, for me, has helped a great deal. And I think perhaps it may help you as well. There's also an allegory of seeing the photograph within a frame, and the more flamboyant and bombastic the frame of the actual picture or painting or image that you're looking at, that's monetary things, homes and cars and jewelry and all these distractions around us, are the gaudy frame. And our job is to ignore the frame and to look at the photograph. Interesting, because I had the book, as I was preparing, I was referencing the book My Stroke of Insight from Jill Bolte Taylor, who remains a Harvard-trained brain scientist. And she wrote a book called My Stroke of Insight. And the reason why I find it appropriate for our conversation today, especially appropriate for the things that we're discussing in terms of separation of mind and soul and thinking, and how the thinking can become our hell, is that she experienced a massive stroke in the left hemisphere of her brain. And as she observed her mind deteriorate to the point that she could not walk, talk, read, write, or recall any of her life, all within 4 hours, Taylor alternated between the euphoria of the intuitive and kinesthetic right brain, in which she felt a sense of complete well-being and peace, and the logical sequential left brain, which recognized that she was having a stroke and enabled her to seek help before she was completely lost. And it would take her 8 years to fully recover from that. And I was giggling to myself because, boy, do we live in a simulation. I had extracted this book from my bookshelf while preparing to speak with all of you. And then today or yesterday, Diary of a CEO on YouTube, who has a massive following, interviewed Jill Bolte Taylor. And I do encourage all of you to watch that. She actually pulls out brains and tries to articulate it. And essentially, in layman's terms, what happened was one side of her brain was damaged, the thinking part, and the other side was fine. And while that's scary, and she couldn't dial 911, she says 911 didn't exist to me, which is a terrifying premise. Language didn't exist to her as well. She went on the phone to call. She called her, used the numbers on her business card, the squiggly things on her business card, in order to dial her office. And she said she tried to speak, and it came out as whoa, 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 because she just couldn't comprehend it. But the lesson that we need to extract from Jill Bolte Taylor is bliss that she experienced after coming through what she had dealt with that stroke, as well as how she had lived her life after that she was essentially freed from her thinking mind. And it reminds me of The event plus thinking is your perception of reality. An event without thinking, that's the real reality. And that event without thinking, that's my goal for everything, and that's peace. So every event that is happening in the world without thinking is reality. But it's our thinking that makes it so. It was Shakespearean. No thing is either good or bad, but it is only thinking that makes it so. Shakespeare was onto something. So I also wanted to reference Martha Beck's work, The Way of Integrity, where she speaks about how integrity is the cure for being unhappy and that the secret for success is alignment. And the way Martha Beck articulates that is that consciousness collapse probability into reality. Like we are the observer as well as the observed. But if we don't do the work in order to become fully aligned with ourselves, we are not only lying to ourselves, but we can't live a good life. Because the question that she posits is, if you were absolutely free, what would you do? And then she pushes us to do that. And then she observes that all of us will have the pushback of I have responsibilities. I can't do that. I have to stay in this city because my parents are aging, or I have to stay in the school district because my kids are doing X, Y, and Z, and I can't leave that job. I've been at that job for 20 years. I wouldn't know the first thing and where to go. And her pushback is that absolutely true? For you to challenge yourself and say, well, is that assumption of that roadblock definitively true? And is that something that I will accept? And that's where the challenge starts. So we're going to do a little exercise from Martha Beck's Way of Integrity. I want you guys to you could keep track of this either on your computer or with a pen and paper. And I'm going to ask you there are 28 questions, and it's just a true-false question. So I'm going to tear through these quickly, and at the end, we're going to score, and we'll talk a little bit about what that score means. Again, just true-false. In general, I see people as good and lovable. True or false? I sometimes feel my daily activities are meaningless. True or false? I adore the company of my friends and loved ones. True or false? My job, includes the job of homemaker, feels like a heavy burden. True or false? I feel on purpose, meaning that you're fulfilled even on the most ordinary day. True or false? I have trouble sustaining loving relationships. True or false? I have frequent infections, colds, flu, etc. when people around me aren't sick. True or false? There's an undercurrent of contentment that supports me at all time. True or false? I get to make a living doing something I love. True or false? I don't feel really seen and understood by anybody. True or false? I believe my presence is changing the world for the better, in small ways or large. True or false? My relationships are often troubled by anger and mistrust. True or false? I don't need any mood-altering substance or exciting activity to feel great. True or false? Other people seem to be accomplishing great things, but I just don't measure up. True or false? I have friends whose company I don't really enjoy. True or false? I sleep deeply and restfully almost every night. True or false? I can almost always count on my loved ones to understand me. True or false? Though frightening things sometimes happen, I always feel basically safe. True or false? I have aches, pains, and fatigue that limit my activities. True or false? I frequently feel annoyed at whoever happens to be around me. True or false? I love my job, and I can't wait to get to it. True or false? I often feel so worried I don't sleep well. True or false? My life is full of love and companionship. True or false? I don't feel as if my work contributes anything important in the world. True or false? Even when people around me get sick, I almost always stay healthy. True or false? I often feel an underlying sense of sadness or despair. True or false? I believe everyone's essence is basically good. True or false? 28, I feel angry even when I'm alone. True or false? Now, everybody have their answers. We're going to count the words that you circled or wrote down, and we're going to write the amount. So if you wrote 9 of the jeepers, I messed it up. Gosh darn it. Anyway, you guys, I messed that up royally because there's a grading system on the page, and I thought it was just true or false. I apologize. My goodness. Well, if you were below a certain score, the idea is to say that you live in an unusually high state of integrity. You may have spent time in the dark wood of error earlier in your life, but you know the way out. And this book might be a nice refresher. It's essentially just a mirror that we're holding up to our lives. And even though I messed up the scoring of that, I do think it is still a very good exercise for us to go through in order to figure out where the hiccups are in our lives and how we can fix those hiccups. So, which actually rolls into a Buddhist saying, which is tension is who you think you should be, and reality is who you are. And that is perfectly aligned with the book of Martha Beck's book, The Way of Integrity. And really the challenge there is for us to ask ourselves those questions that I just went through and be as honest as we possibly can with us. And it reminds me of a million years ago, 15 years ago, when I first got into social media and I ran a social media agency. I used to say that social media was like the truth machine. There was a science fiction book by an author named James Halpern, and he talked about the truth machine, how it would protect borders and how things, while at first would be very difficult, it would make our world a better place. And I posited back then, incorrectly, that social media was going to be like the truth machine, that our lives would be exposed and people would see the truth of us. And it became the complete opposite of that. However, what Martha Beck is speaking about is that the only way for you to find the path to true happiness is to understand that you have to be living in integrity. So how do you know that you're not aligned and not living in integrity? That's based on those answers to those questions, right? Do you feel purposeless? Are you in bad relationships, whether that be romantic relationships, relationships with your friends, relationships with your family? Do you have low energy? As a result of those, do you have bad habits that you can't break? Meaning alcohol abuse, drug abuse, addicted to sex, addicted to porn, any of these things that could potentially bubble up. Of course, you're looking for an elixir if you're not living integrity and all of these things are going sideways, because you're trying to ease that pain. So the concept is to find alignment and to figure out where you are in that process by taking a hard look at everything in your life, not just figuring out, oh, am I fulfilled at my job, but am I fulfilled at home? Am I following my dharma? And in those writings, we realize that intention plus imagination plus belief, that really equals manifestation. It's not the way I was fooled. I'm sure many of you read the book, The Secret, a million years ago, and I had interpreted it solely from a monetary perspective. That was ask, believe, and receive. And now I see it as something different and much more profound, that when those three things are aligned, the source energy, the alignment code of our lives gives us feedback in order to live our dharma. And that's intention plus imagination plus belief. So we're going to do another exercise. I promise I won't mess this one up. So on a rate of 1 to 10, 10 being the most happy, how happy are you with your life? Think about that for a second. 10 being the most happy, 1 to 10, how happy are you with your life? What will make it 10? And if you ask yourself what will make it a 10, that's what I want you to do. It sounds ridiculous and it sounds almost too simple, but it's a difficult thing. And after I read that book, I really put some serious work in to try and figure that out. And frankly, gang, you're on the receiving end of what I believe is my dharma. And that is to interact with as many human beings as possible to bring these teachings and the things that I'm learning along the way and the concepts and the philosophies and the ancient wisdom, frankly, so that we can all evolve together, and to open my mind and my heart so that via my podcast, I could bring luminaries and individuals on their own path and on their own journey in order to allow all of our vibrations to rise. And I think there's also the phrasing of this really stuck with me, and it was from the book A Course in Miracles. And it says, we all bear a treasured wound and let it go. Meaning there's that story that we all tell in our minds, or lie to ourselves and say, oh, I can't do this, I can't do that, or you don't understand the way I was raised, it was awful and it was terrible. And in the book A Course in Miracles, it challenges us to sort of grasp onto Adler's teachings, psychologist Adler, as well as in the book, The Courage to Be Disliked, where it pushes us to say, and this is a tough one to wrap your head around, if that wounded story that you tell yourself is, I had a terrible relationship with my father, is to really examine it and really figure out, did you really have a terrible relationship with your father? Or were your behaviors, because in the manner with which you articulated it and ingested it, the reason why you didn't want to have that relationship with your father? And is that a story that you tell yourself so that you have an excuse, so that you have that treasured wound to say, this is why all these things are bad. And all of these books are just challenging us to call BS on that and say, look, you're starting from zero, because the past is just the illusion that you remember it as. The future is your imagination. And all we have, literally all we have, is this present moment. And that led me to exploring things around the wisdom of our heart, the wisdom of our brain, and the wisdom of our biogenome and our gut and what's happening there. And I think there's a meditation app that, boy, Sam Harris has a meditation app, and I'm forgetting the name of the app. Anyway, in the meditation, what Sam does, and I encourage you, if you're all in the practice of meditating, to try this. In the midst of the meditation, he challenges us to define where we're meditating from. Like, where is our physical body? Where is our brain? Where is our skin? Where is our face? To feel, where am I meditating from? Where are the thoughts coming from? And then he challenges us further that if we feel like it's from our head, to drop our awareness to our heart, into our chest cavity, to perceive the world from this location and to just see what that feels like, and to push yourself to say, well, what is reality? Am I my mind? Am I my heart? How can I see myself? Can I project myself outside of myself and see what the world sees? I just found that to be a pretty fascinating practice, which led to an exploring of the quantum field practice, where you're both the dreamer as well as the dream. So part of that led me to the remembering process, which is a book by a friend of mine who I grew up with. I grew up in Mayapack, New York, Daniel Barrett. He's a musician, a producer. And while interacting with a client many years ago who he was producing an album for, Daniel brought to fruition an exercise that he would use with musicians. And he happened to bring it in front of somebody, Joe Vitale, who you may recognize from The Secret. And Joe was the guy that he was doing music with. So the remembering process is a way to get out of your own way, to be able to say, when you're thinking about this song, project yourself into the future and try to remember how you got to the end result of the song. So I want us to do this one together. Promise I won't blow it like the other one, but this is a time travel meditation from the book, The Remembering Process. Again, it's Daniel Barrett and Joe Vitale. If you guys want to grab the book, I'll send you all links afterward. But I want you to think about this. So when you're ready, okay, you don't have to do this now, obviously, but you're going to lie down, sit comfortably, close your eyes, breathe deeply for a few minutes, and imagine a special room in your mind's eye, one with two comfortable chairs facing each other. You're sitting in one chair, and the other chair is for your future self, the person that you're going to become 5 years from now. Your future self knows everything that you know, as well as everything that will happen to you during the next 5 years. Now, imagine having a conversation with that person. You can ask anything that you want, and you're going to listen for the answers. Then when you're ready, you ask your future self, that person that you're speaking to get up and leave the room. And imagine that your past self from 5 years earlier walks into the room and sits down. Now you're the future self. You are that person. And you have to take a moment to recall what your past self has been going through. What was your life exactly like 5 years ago? Imagine your past self asking you questions about how your life turned out, and see yourself answering with empathy, understanding, reassurance, and I'll add love. That's not in there, but absolutely with love. And tell your past self about some of the challenges that will be coming up in the years ahead. Challenges that you've faced already, but you're kind of warning them. And when you finish connecting with your past self, imagine that your future self re-enters the room, and all three of you stand up. Your bodies begin to glow and become translucent. You float toward each other and merge into a single being of light. And when this happens, you may experience an intense release of emotion. I promise you will, because I did this on my own. The three of you are now an integrated whole, a single being who exists outside of time. And this being is the real you. I encourage you to try the meditation at least once. The meditation was put into the book by Daniel and Joe Vitale, and it's from Steve Pavlina and his book, Personal Development for Smart People. So you may want to access that as well. But I found that exercise and that meditation be absolutely transporting. Part of that and part of the remembering process, really, from my perspective, is to just quiet your mind. That if you project yourself into the future and you try to remember the good things that happened to you, part of Daniel's push is to be as specific as you possibly can. What were the clothes? What did the clothes on your body feel like? What was the temperature? What were you eating? Were you in a good mood? Were you in a bad mood? Although he does warn, he uses an acronym, HALT. He says, don't do this if you are hungry, angry. If you're hangry, don't do the exercise. You have to be in a good state of mind. And then he encourages us to draft a letter of congratulations to your future self for having accomplished all of the good things. I'm in the process of doing this. I strongly encourage all of you to do it, that if you're really doing this work and you're really looking inward and you're really trying to evolve and really trying to get to a place where, for me, my goal through all of this is one word: peace. Daniel also mentioned something in the remembering process that I found profound, and that is the upper limit problem. And the upper limit problem is that we put brakes on our positive energy and our success and our love. And as I was reading that, preparing for this today, it struck me that yesterday, when on the Quantum Shift podcast, I spoke to Dr. Howard Eisenberg, and one of the chapters of the doctor's book is titled "Stretch Your Mind to Shift Your Reality." And when I dug a little bit deeper for the doctor to unpack that for me, something banged a gong, frankly. And if you guys watch the podcast, I encourage you to do so. In the podcast, I talked about what the doctor had written in his book and how I felt it was profound because I'd never thought of this before. And he speaks about how the scientific community essentially denounces anything having to be outside of the realm of what they perceive as quantitative left brain activity. And for him, as a medical doctor, that was a head scratcher. And he presented evidence to that. And his evidence was, we, humanity, have not come to these profound scientific breakthroughs like Einstein or, whatever it might be by following the scientific method. We did not follow step by step a linear progression to inventions or to discoveries in science. That in science, in that realm, in that world, you need imagination. That some of the greatest lessons that Einstein taught us had to do with lucid dreaming, had to do with going on a walk and figuring it out and being playful. And which is why I love the synergy of all of these writings and all of these books that we're all probably encountering, because if you guys are even on this call, you're curious, right? And it resonated for me, and the doctor kind of chuckled because I'd never heard it explained that way. It's like, why are scientists saying that, pish-poshing it and kind of saying it's quack medicine? Like, why do even psychiatrists say that? And he brought up a point that I found to be profound. I have an undergraduate degree in psychology, where psychologists were almost mocking their own profession and saying that it's not based in the scientific method, that it's, conversational, et cetera. But the reality being that when people heal through psychotherapy, that statistically and scientifically, it's been proven that therapists that have a strong empathetic relationship with their patients are the most successful. So if you really unpack that and think about it, the scientific mind is denouncing it, but it's helping them be successful. So it's almost like we've placed these blinders on ourselves and we're aggressively pushing ourselves into Plato's cave to only stare at the wall, even when we know that it's a cave and that it's just a projection of these things on the wall, that we're so comfortable and warm in that cave, we don't want to leave it. We don't want to be enlightened. We don't want to go see the light. I just found that really fascinating that he was able to articulate so beautifully. So he also challenges us to integrate that into our lives and invite us to do examination. And his quote to me, which I found to be profound, was, "The only way out is in." And that's where I find myself today, is doing very hard work and looking at myself and examining the things that I'm doing and how I'm approaching things in my relationships with myself and my individual relationships that bubbled up from The Courage to be Disliked, where in that book, they speak about how every problem in our lives has to do with interpersonal relationships and how we interact with the human being across from us as well as ourselves. Part of the exercise that the doctor talked about when he said the only way out is in is to really challenge yourself and say, what illusion am I ready to release? What is the lie that you're telling yourself that you're ready to release? And what is the truth that you're ready to embody? And what aligned action will you take literally in the next 24 hours in order to find that integrity? And integrity, with Martha Beck in the book, the integrity, she says, it's not about like, I have integrity. It's like the integrity of, like, if you think of a plane flying, a plane that has good integrity, everything is working. There's symbiosis, and it's all together, and it all works together in order for the plane to fly. And that's really where she's coming from, that the only way that we can function and function at a high level and function properly is if we are challenging ourselves in that way to really address the illusions and the lies that we tell ourselves, and to really seek truth in our lives. Could be dangerous. We don't want to go blowing up any marriages or relationships or anything of that nature, or quitting our jobs. We want to just examine it first, and then we get to that eventually. And another profound aspect of the book, The Courage to be Disliked, is as follows. Find the thing, do the thing well. And this was a hard pill for me to swallow. I can't unable to show you guys the deck, but the first picture of the deck was me doing a television appearance. And a large part of my career has been public facing, being the guy on stage, being the guy doing a guest appearance, being the CEO of the company, giving the presentation. And part of my quantum shift and my evolving as a human being and as a father and as a husband and as a friend and as a son and as a brother and as an uncle, list goes on, is to, throughout all of that, is to deny the desire for recognition. And that is, I believe, one of the most critical elements of this work, if in fact you are on that journey, where if you're being honest with yourself and you're finding wisdom in that truth, and you are defining the thing, your dharma, your real true calling. But if you can release that desire for recognition, then that's really your thing. That stung, that hurt. I've probably spent the past year and a half almost there, except for denying the desire for recognition. And that's where I was going wrong. And I found that to be definitively profound and brought me to this exercise, which I'd like you all to do with me. So in the book, Martha's book about integrity, she talks about how she wants us to think about this. So if you put your hands out like this, and in your mind's eye, you think about all of the bad things that you hang on to, or like the bad behaviors, the bad habits, and you picture it as a thing in your hand. For me, when I did it, I pictured it as like a little lion. It's kind of clawing at my hand, and it's roaring, and it's really angry, pissed off. And it's just roar. And those are all the bad behaviors, right? And you just look at that thing in your hand, and you're observing those bad behaviors embodied in this little animal that's just really angry in that hand. And you put out your other hand and you envision the best version of you, buttoned up version of you, the one that is embarrassed and feels shame when it thinks about the animal on the other hand, and how that one is judging all the bad behaviors and it's just expending so much energy to try and control the bad behaviors. And the bad behaviors are so angry at that part of your personality that's trying to limit it. And it wants to just go out and tear the world up and enact their revenge and just all of that. And she encourages us to pause. And when you could see the one aspect of you that is all buttoned up and is expending all of this energy toward the bad stuff, says, can you see how exhausted that side of you is? Can you acknowledge how exhausted the other side is? And can you look at both sides of yourself, and can you observe that? And she says, the observer, the one that's looking at both of those, that's the true you. You are the observer. In the book, she says, welcome home. And man, that knocked me on my backside. I hope you find that to be similarly interesting and compelling for you. Kind of reminded me of in the conversation that I had with Dr. Eisenberg yesterday. He says, the universe is dreaming through you. The question is, are you awake in the dream? Which I thought was a big deal. And I'm going to leave you with a couple of little things as we wrap up here. It's 3:56. There's a Meister Eckhart, a 14th century Christian mystic, said this. He said, the outer work can never be small if the inner work is great, and the outer work can never be great if the inner work is small. I don't know about you. I think I've gone wrong a couple times in my career and in my personal life by getting really frustrated. Like, why isn't the outer stuff happening? Why isn't this working the way I want it to work? I'm working so hard. I'm working 15 hours a day. I'm grinding. Why isn't that success coming? What's going on? And get angry, get angry. And it's really a challenge and a call to arms for all of us to look internally and to be the observer and to give ourselves some grace and to modify what we've been told success is and to modify the lie that we've allowed our culture to tell us and ourselves to tell us. And I'll leave you with this. In 2015, I was in my parents' house and I was leaving my father. He was in hospice care, living with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. And we'd been kind of running shifts with my dad. And he was kind of in and out of consciousness. And there was one evening when I was leaving, and as I'm walking out, he kind of popped up and he said, Chris. I was like, yeah, Dad. And he said, keep up the good work. I was like, okay, cool, Dad. Love you. Bye. And within about 48 hours, my father passed away. I realized that those words, keep up the good work, were his last words to me. And that's really what I want to end with for you. I want you all to keep up the good work, because by virtue of you even being on this call, you're working at it, and we are all definitively connected. We are one consciousness. Each individual is just the consciousness having its own experience so that it can go back into that universal consciousness and allow that consciousness to continue to evolve. What I believe is to continue to evolve to pure love. And I think that that is our purpose on God's good earth, whether it be a simulation, computer-made simulation, whether it just be we are consciousness manifest. I don't know. But I do know science is starting to prove that we are all definitively one consciousness. And I feel that. Hope you guys feel that too. It's Friday afternoon, 3:59. Thank you for your time. Again, my name is Chris Desi. I have no sales pitch. I find joy in coaching executives that are going through similar things that I am. If you want to work with me, you can go to .ai or just Google Chris Desi, and you'll find all the information that you will need. If you want to schedule a follow-up coaching call with me, I typically charge about $1,200. For anybody on the call, it's $199. I thank you, and I wish you a lovely weekend, and keep up the good work, gang. Bye, everybody. Bye, Irene.